disaster happens, it becomes news around the globe. Whether it's the scale or the spectacle.
Look at the debris. Look at all the debris. Look at all the debris in the air.
The financial cost or the lives lost. These massive events fill mankind with fascination and fear. In this series, we're looking at some of the biggest disasters to ever strike the planet.
The level of the destruction here shows just how much needs to be done to help rebuild these communities.
For the next hour, we're going to look at what happens when the very ground we stand on crumbles beneath our feet. We'll witness the awesome power that can bring concrete and steel crashing to the ground, tear bridges apart as if they were cardboard, and end hundreds of thousands of lives in moments. This is going to be Seismic. Today, we're looking at the top 10 earthquakes of all time. The Earth is covered by 20 rocky tectonic plates between 50 and 200 kilometers thick. They sit on the Earth's mantle, a layer of semi-molten magma, and are in constant, slow motion. Beneath the mantle are the planet's outer core and inner core. Some of these gigantic plates are moving steadily away from each other, creating chasms like the Mariana Trench in the Pacific or the Silvra Fissure in Iceland. Other plates slide under each other and overlap. They can give birth to mountain ranges, like the Himalayas. The place where two plates meet is called a fault line. At this intersection, trillions of tons of rock have been pressing on trillions of tons of other rock for millions of years. Eventually, the pressure becomes unbearable and is released when two plates suddenly slip or push past each other, and that's called an earthquake. The power they unleash is the power of the Earth itself. It can be cataclysmic. At number 10 in our ranking, we go to Izmit, Turkey, where we see how the timing of a quake can be just as important as its power. On August 17th at 3 a.m., the Eurasian and Anatolian plates give way to pressure and slipped, tearing a nearly 160-kilometer strip along the North Anatolian fault line. For 37 seconds, it releases the energy equivalent of 1,000 Hiroshima bombs, sending out seismic waves that cause the ground to ripple, crumble, buckle, and shake. The city isn't ready.
There is a lot of debris. Gölcük was very heavily damaged. The fault line went right through the town. There's a lot of damage.
As the powerful shocks rattle the buildings of the city, most can't withstand the punishment. Many simply collapse. In barely a minute, the city descends into chaos. The earthquake struck in the middle of the night while residents were sleeping. No alert message was sent. In an instant, 20,000 buildings were damaged, and 120,000 others were almost completely destroyed. 17,000 inhabitants lose their lives. The cities of Gölcük, Derince, Derica, and Sukarya were also partly destroyed, as well as a large part of the capital, Istanbul. In less than a minute, a tranquil night had turned into terror. That's the reality of an earthquake. Armageddon delivered from below. The first assessment is terrible, but the nightmare is far from over. A fire breaks out in the largest refinery in the country, located near the epicenter of the earthquake. While rescue teams are frantically looking for survivors, hundreds of firefighters race to fight the fire, which threatens to ignite millions of liters of oil, putting even more lives in jeopardy. To avoid a new disaster, the rescuers are forced to abandon their efforts and evacuate the area. The earthquake victims they cannot rescue will be left to perish under the rubble of their homes. Damage to roads and bridges compound the misery by making rescue attempts even more difficult. But worse is to come. On August 19th, 2 new tremors hit the area. These are aftershocks caused by pressure redistribution within the fault. They create earthquakes less strong than the first, but powerful enough to destroy what remains, demolishing many badly damaged buildings and claiming more casualties. As the last survivors get extracted from the ruins of their homes, the country begins to mourn its dead.
Like the vast majority of people who are still underneath rubble by this morning, the international rescue teams and the heavy lifting equipment has simply arrived too late. And it's left survivors with a number of questions, but a lot fewer answers.
The tragedy of the Izmit quake raised many questions. Since the city was built near a known fault line, the Turkish government had an obligation to assure that the city's buildings met quake-proofing standards. But the extent of the damage caused by the earthquake left no room for doubt. These regulations were neither adhered to by the builders nor enforced by the authorities.
The precise location and scale of this earthquake was predicted over a year ago. The precise time couldn't be known, but they should have been prepared.
When the truth comes out, the authorities are taken to task by the public, and while many prosecutions for this negligence are sought, few are convicted. Since then, throughout the region, construction standards for new buildings have been tightened. Will they manage to resist the power of a new earthquake? It will take another quake to say for sure. In the meantime, the people of Izmit will forever remember the images of the terrible earthquake of August 17, 1999. For the 9th place on our list of the worst earthquakes on the planet, we head to Southeast Asia, where, off the Indonesian island of Sumatra, the Sumatra-Andaman earthquake struck in 2004. Each year, the Earth sees on average more than 1 million earthquakes. Fortunately, the vast majority of them are too weak to be felt, or they occur in remote and uninhabited areas and cause no real damage. And since 2/3 of the planet is covered in water, a great number of earthquakes occur in the ocean. Most of the time, they don't amount to anything. But on December 26, 2004, an underwater earthquake had dramatic repercussions. A little before 8 a.m., 160 kilometers off the Indonesian island of Sumatra, a part of the 1,600-kilometer-wide Indian tectonic plate slipped under the Burmese tectonic plate, raising it by 5 meters and displacing billions of tons of water. That movement triggered a devastating tsunami. 20 minutes after the earthquake, a wave 30 meters high, the size of a 9-story building, reaches the shores of Sumatra, taking residents and tourists completely by surprise. The tragedy claims more than 100,000 victims. Then, after passing over Sumatra, the wave continues its destructive course.
That is very bad. Down floor rooms have got it.
The final toll of the tsunami would rise to more than 220,000 dead in a radius of more than 8,000 kilometers. It was a disaster of horrific scale, triggered by an invisible earthquake whose seismic waves were born in the depths of the ocean. The Richter scale is still commonly referred to today, but was replaced in the 1970s by the moment magnitude scale, which measures the strength of seismic energy released by quakes. The earthquake that hit Izmit in 1999 was a magnitude 7.8. The underwater quake that occurred off Sumatra measured a whopping magnitude 9.3. The difference between 7.8 and 9.3 is bigger than it first seems. This measurement scale is logarithmic. A magnitude 9.3 earthquake is more than 30 times more powerful and releases more than 170 times more energy than a magnitude 7.8 earthquake. The Sumatra earthquake released the equivalent of 38,000 Hiroshima bombs into the ocean, a colossal amount of energy. Such formidable earthquakes can have powerful repercussions around the globe and literally move the Earth. They can even temporarily alter the shape of the planet, including disrupting its rotation, which can slightly shorten the length of a day. While it's the Indonesian tsunami that made big headlines in 2004, the earthquake that triggered it also caused damage. Before the deadly wave erased everything, it is estimated that hundreds of buildings collapsed from the first tremors of the quake. In fact, thousands of people likely died before the tsunami even arrived. The earthquake impacted the entire region. The altitude of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands dropped by 1 meter, placing some of the land below sea level. The coasts of India were also extremely affected.
The level of the destruction here in just this one corner of India's eastern coast shows just how much needs to be done to help rebuild these communities. For these people have lost everything: their homes, their livelihoods, and their families.
The Sumatra-Andaman earthquake is one of the best and worst examples of what an earthquake of that magnitude can unleash. Indonesia will bear the scars of the event forever. For number 8 in our ranking, we go from one of the biggest quakes to one of the costliest, the great Hanshin Awaji earthquake that hit the city of Kobe in 1995. Japan is located on what is known as the Pacific Ring of Fire. The area is characterized by its seismic activity, one of the most intense in the world. The residents of Kobe have first-hand experience. The city was hit on January 17, 1995 at 5:46 a.m. by a jolt, lasting about 20 seconds. The earthquake had a magnitude between 6.9 and 7.3. It completely ravaged the city. Geology is partly to blame for the level of destruction. The hypocenter of the quake, its subterranean point of origin, was only 20 kilometers from the densely populated city of Kobe. Second, it was a so-called shallow earthquake, with its hypocenter less than 24 kilometers underground. Shallow quakes are more destructive because seismic waves retain all their energy when they reach the surface. And minor fault lines under the city further helped transmit the waves. In just 20 seconds, nearly 400,000 buildings were damaged. More than 150,000 collapsed, and 80% of the port was destroyed. Railways, roads, drinking water supply systems, electrical networks, everything was destroyed in this city of 11 million people. Immediately after the earthquake, more than 300 fires broke out in the city. The result? 6,000 dead and more than 40,000 injured. At the end of the day, half the city had been ravaged. Given its geographical situation, the city of Kobe had been living with the risk of being hit by an earthquake for a long time. In 1981, building standards had already been tightened, and many of those newer buildings fared well. But anything built before that date failed in the face of the violence of the tremors. For several days, dozens of aftershocks continued to rattle the region, sowing terror among the survivors of the disaster. When the earth finally stopped shaking, the city could begin its difficult work of mourning and rebuilding.
In a makeshift church they prayed. From one young man, a loving touch, as he and his friends remembered his 20-year-old fiancée.
At the scene, survivors frantically tried to salvage what they could from the rubble that was their home, but others could only mourn the death of their loved ones. At the time, the damage was estimated at $114 billion. It was a major disaster, which still haunts the people of Kobe and all of Japan. Our number 7 earthquake takes us to the Himalayas, and more precisely Kashmir, to a region located near Islamabad, the Pakistani capital, where a terrible earthquake struck in 2005. Kashmir sits on the border between Pakistan and India. The place has been a territory of conflict between those two nations since the creation of their border in 1947. The giant mountains of the Himalayas bear testament to the planetary forces at play in the area. As the Indian subcontinent drifts northwards, its tectonic plate is forcing its way under the Eurasian plate, raising whole mountains from beneath the earth. Usually it goes smoothly, but it was a violent shift in this movement that triggered the quake at 8:50 on the morning of October 8th. The timing could not have been worse. This was another shallow quake. Experts say it may have been as little as 3,000 meters from the surface. And with the epicenter just 10 kilometers from the city of Muzaffarabad, with its population of 150,000, the destruction was catastrophic. In less than a minute, more than 750,000 buildings were reduced to rubble. 17,000 of these were school buildings, right at the start of the school day. The death toll tragically includes 19,000 children who never made it home. All around, the numbers are heartbreaking. At least 75,000 dead, 40,000 or more injured, just to start. Because the quake also destroyed almost all the hospitals, there was nowhere for the injured to receive treatment, leaving more to die. Only 10% of the city of Balakot was left standing. $3.5 million people and 500,000 farm animals were left without shelter at the start of a brutal Himalayan winter. And with roads and bridges destroyed, assistance became practically impossible. Whole towns remained cut off for months. On the Mercalli scale, which measures the intensity of an earthquake based on the damage it causes, the 2005 quake in Kashmir ranked level 11 out of a possible 12. Level 11 denotes an extreme level of destruction. Level 12 means total destruction. The type of soil in the area played a role in the extent of the damage. During an earthquake, loose or sandy ground undergoes the phenomenon known as liquefaction. The shaking solid land begins to behave like a liquid. That's what happened in Kashmir. The earthquake caused the ground to melt away under the buildings. Entire hills collapsed in on themselves, triggering massive landslides that flowed like water. Entire villages and their residents were swallowed by the debris. For the struggling survivors, the nightmare is far from over. With so much of the region flattened, the many people left homeless by the quake have no choice but to band together in makeshift camps. At the start of a cold winter and lacking resources and sanitation, health problems are inevitable. Respiratory diseases, scabies, and diarrhea spread in the camps, increasing the number of victims.
Jolted into a new reality.
But out of the tragedy comes a much-needed glimmer of hope. After 6 decades of bitter conflict, the Indian and Pakistani authorities put aside their hostilities and opened 5 border crossing points to provide aid to the victims. Aside from serving an immediate need to the survivors, the truce offers everyone hope that long-term peace and reconstruction are possible. That single minute when the earth shook in 2005 changed the destiny of Kashmir and its people. Collapsing buildings are one of the biggest causes of death in major quakes, claiming around 10,000 lives each year. Buildings are mainly designed to resist vertical pressures, basically staying upright. But during an earthquake, they get subjected to extremely violent horizontal forces, which are much more difficult to contend with. Architects and engineers have developed technologies to dampen many of these horizontal forces. Some buildings are constructed on flexible foundations that move with the swaying ground, or they utilize shock absorbers that cushion the jolts. Other buildings have even been equipped with gigantic pendulums to counterbalance the movements of the destructive seismic waves. Seismic-proof construction is an ever-evolving field. Foundations that resist ground movements, more flexible materials that can deform during an earthquake, and other innovations are being implemented with a single objective: to ensure that buildings in seismic zones do not shake themselves to death. In the event of a major earthquake, these ingenious new construction techniques represent the only hope of saving lives. Now, let's continue our ranking of the 10 most notable earthquakes. Coming in at 6 is one of the most famous earthquakes, which happened along one of the most notorious fault lines. We head to San Francisco, USA, and the quake of 1906. California's famous San Andreas Fault runs the entire length of the state. This is the place where the locals grimly predict the famous Big One, the earthquake that will one day destroy Los Angeles and San Francisco and plunge a chunk of California into the Pacific Ocean.
The students in Miss Linares' class dropped to the ground and got under their desks for the Big One.
If this earthquake would have happened in reality, there would have been buildings coming down. We know that there would be no water now in certain areas.
Seismologists think there's a good chance that an earthquake with a magnitude 7.5 or greater will strike this part of the state within the next 30 years.
I think I would have been very prepared. With all the videos that we've seen today, we were ready for that.
Definitely.
To find out what this famous Big One might look like, let's go back to the year 1906. At that time, San Francisco was a prosperous metropolis of 400,000 inhabitants. The city was created during the gold rush of the 1840s. In just a few decades, it had become an important economic and cultural center. But on the 18th of April 1906, at 5:12 a.m., the inhabitants of San Francisco are brutally awakened by powerful tremors. Less than a minute later, a magnitude 7.9 earthquake hits the city. The shaking lasts for about a minute. That's all the time it takes to devastate San Francisco. But the worst is yet to come. The earthquake ruptures gas and water pipes throughout the crumbled city. Within minutes, fires break out everywhere. Without access to water, firefighters can only stand by, powerless against the inferno. For 4 days, the city is engulfed in flames. The toll of the disaster was terrible. More than 80% of San Francisco was devastated. 3,000 people lost their lives, and hundreds of thousands were homeless. But despite the tragedy, the inhabitants somehow maintained hope. They were convinced that one day, San Francisco would rise from its ashes, and time has proven them right. Since then, California has been shaken several times. Many of these quakes have caused billions of dollars in damage and created hundreds of victims, but none have matched the power of that devastating 1906 earthquake that struck San Francisco. At least, not yet. Let's now have a look at the earthquake that takes 5th place in our ranking. We head to China, where a quake rocked Sichuan province in 2008. China is riddled with fault lines within its territory. Beijing alone sits on 15 of them. But because most of this massive country sits on the Eurasian plate, most of these faults are minor. That doesn't mean they're never active. In fact, the country experiences, on average, more than 50 significant tremors per year. When a major earthquake strikes one of China's densely populated regions, the results can be horrendous. That's precisely what happened on May 12, 2008. At 2:28 p.m., the Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate near Jiajing, a city in Sichuan province with a population of more than 600,000. The collision triggers a magnitude 7.9 earthquake that shakes the earth for 2 agonizing minutes. This is a very long earthquake, and because the center is only 20 kilometers deep, it transmits tremendous energy. The power of the tremors are felt in the city of Shaanxi, more than 1,600 kilometers east of the epicenter. Geologically, this was a massive collision of tectonic plates, with astonishing repercussions. In some areas, the ground heaves up over 9 meters, and witnesses described seeing a mountain explode. The consequences for people living and working in the area are cataclysmic. 80% of the buildings in Sichuan province are razed. More than 12 million animals are killed. 5 million houses are completely destroyed, and nearly 6 million houses seriously damaged. The human toll is catastrophic. Tens of thousands of people lose their lives. Nearly 400,000 are injured, and nearly 10 million are left homeless. The aftermath of the earthquake brings even more chaos and destruction to the suffering survivors. Liquefaction triggers nearly 200,000 landslides and buries thousands of additional houses. Some landslides block waterways and create natural dams. It's a frequent phenomenon after earthquakes, producing what are known as quake lakes. More than 800 of them form in the minutes following the earthquake. Many don't last long. Under the weight of the water, some of these dams burst, and as the lakes suddenly empty, they send torrents of water over populated areas, smashing into the damaged properties. The post-quake landslides and flooding kill an additional 30,000 people. The scenes of desperation and devastation cover 110,000 square kilometers, an area almost as big as England. The danger doesn't abate. Aftershocks continue for several months as Chinese authorities battled to drain quake lakes, clear debris, and rehouse more people than the population of Sweden. The challenge they face is monumental, and rebuilding will take time. The 2008 Sichuan earthquake is one of the worst natural disasters of the 21st century. The official death toll of 90,000 is believed by many to be too low for the horrific scenes they witnessed. Many of the deaths could have been avoided by better construction methods. Just a few hundred miles from the epicenter of the devastating Sichuan quake is the site of the deadliest earthquake in history. At number 4, it's the Jiajing earthquake that struck the Wei River Valley in Shaanxi province in 1556. Jiajing ruled as the Ming Dynasty Emperor of China at the time of the tragedy, and his name will forever be associated with one of the greatest natural disasters of all time. The earthquake was estimated at a magnitude between 8 and 8.3. It was triggered on January 23, 1556. In Shaanxi province, at that time, several cities flourished along the river. All of them would be completely destroyed. The Wei River Valley was surrounded by the cities of Huaixian, Weinan, and Huaiyan. In Huaixian, every building was reduced to rubble. The earthquake demolished an area of more than 1,500 square kilometers, twice the size of New York City. More than 1.5 million people lived in the area. Only half survived. Many of the people in the cities were killed by falling masonry and the collapsing heavy stone walls of their homes. This tragedy was so significant that it almost immediately inspired a change in building methods and materials across China. Once authorities recognized the danger of rock and stone construction, they made the switch to wood and bamboo, more lightweight and more flexible on shaking ground and easier to rebuild. This was a change that would last for centuries. Most of the casualties weren't from the cities, but from among the millions who lived on the nearby Luce Plateau. Luce, a silty clay-like soil, had been deposited over millennia, and the residents had used it to construct their homes, called yadongs, on the high cliffs surrounding the plateau. The clay homes didn't stand a chance against an earthquake with the strength of 1,000 atomic bombs. All around, as the houses collapsed on their inhabitants, landslides swept still more off the sides of the cliffs. The area was completely wiped out in minutes. The consequences of this earthquake have remained in the memory of the Chinese people. The total number of deaths is estimated at 830,000. That would be as if the entire population of the city of San Francisco had been decimated in a single night. With such a toll, the 1556 earthquake is the most gruesome in all of history.
Chile was racked by a series of quakes that took countless lives, left over 1 million homeless, and sent murderous tidal waves racing across the Pacific.
We've seen some incredibly powerful earthquakes so far, but the strongest ever recorded doesn't even make our top 10. Before we continue our countdown, we'll head to Valdivia, Chile, where the most powerful quake ever recorded struck on May 22, 1960. Before this fateful day, and in less than 48 hours, Chile had suffered 3 successive earthquakes of magnitude 7.1, 7.8, and 8.1. Tremors of terrible violence, which ominously announced an even more powerful event to come. Its magnitude would be 9.5, twice as strong as the earthquake that caused the Indonesian tsunami of 2004. and 250 times more powerful than the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. Half the houses in the city of Valdivia would collapse. With the epicenter located just 160 kilometers from the coast, giant tsunamis swept the Chilean coasts with waves 25 meters high. But luckily, this mega-earthquake hit near a sparsely populated area of Chile. The final tally will report fewer than 1,500 dead. If the Valdivia earthquake went down in history for its record magnitude, the top 3 earthquakes you're about to witness in our countdown earned their place for the levels of devastation they caused. Getting back to our ranking of the 10 worst earthquakes that have left their mark on the planet, at 3rd place, we head to the Caribbean island of Haiti. Haiti is one of the poorest and most densely populated countries in the world. The small island in the Caribbean packs 11 million people onto just 26,000 square kilometers. Most of the residents live in abject poverty. They've survived colonialism, political oppression, and brutal dictatorships. They're regularly lashed by Atlantic hurricanes that cause flooding, death, and disease. With these strikes against them, the last thing they need is an earthquake. But on January 12, 2010 at 4:53 p.m., the island is hit by a magnitude 7 earthquake triggered inside a small fault beneath the town of Léogâne. The earthquake rattles the Caribbean. The impact across the island is brutal. Many Haitian buildings are very old or poorly constructed. In the city of Léogâne, 90% of its buildings collapse in an instant. Port-au-Prince, the capital, fares better with some of the island's best constructed buildings, but still takes considerable damage. About 250,000 homes are shattered in the 30 seconds of the quake. Two days after the tragedy, Haiti lies in ruins, its infrastructure destroyed. Communication is completely interrupted, and little can be done to help the rescue and recovery effort, leaving victims to die in the rubble.
For how much longer is it practical to be searching for people who are still alive?
We're pushing the envelope now, probably another day or two, and then it's going to start to go downhill from there. But, you know, we did find some survivors yesterday. We pulled out a couple of today, but each day it grows slimmer and slimmer.
Most hospitals are rendered unusable, leaving many injured survivors to succumb to their wounds. Morgues are full, and bodies start piling up in the streets. In the weeks that follow, the country plunges into chaos. Faced with a lack of water and food, looting begins and anarchy grips the desperate streets of Haiti. Security forces are overwhelmed. Worse, thousands of prisoners escape from the prisons destroyed during the earthquake. And in the midst of the riots, children who have become orphans must learn, on their own, to fight for their survival. The horrible toll of the earthquake is more than 220,000 dead and 300,000 injured. Damage is estimated at more than $10 billion. To this day, the country has still not been completely rebuilt. The island still bears the scars of the terrible earthquake of January 12, 2010. The impact of major earthquakes is always devastating, but some are so powerful they can change the course of history. Some argue that that's the case with number 2 on our list, the Great Kanto earthquake that struck Japan in 1923. Just before noon on September 1st, 1923, the residents of Yokohama and Tokyo on the island of Hanshin are shaken by an earthquake with a magnitude between 7.9 and 8.2. Somewhere in Sagami Bay, a fault, located in the middle of the 4 tectonic plates that make up the seabed, had ruptured so violently that the north shore of the bay and the water level rose 2 meters in just 14 seconds. Near the epicenter, buildings are collapsing before the eyes of the inhabitants. Hotels lining the shore are overwhelmed by rising waters. The Japanese are about to experience an earthquake's worst horrors. 72 kilometers away, in Tokyo, entire neighborhoods see the ground liquefy under their feet. The coastal villages located not far from the city are hit by a tsunami 12 meters high. All over the region, hills are collapsing and giant landslides are burying houses, dragging everything in their path. Eyewitnesses, safely docked in Yokohama Harbor, report seeing the city enveloped in a cloud of dust from the thousands of collapsed buildings, and then, through the dust, the flames. The quake happened at lunchtime when many were cooking over open flames. These fires ignite the wood and paper homes to create rampaging firestorms through Yokohama and Tokyo. Like San Francisco 17 years earlier, broken gas mains feed fires that are already being supercharged by typhoon winds on the other side of the island. Nature is throwing everything at the Japanese people all at once. As fire ravages the ruins of their cities, the terrified citizens run for any safe space they can find. To escape the collapsing buildings, some 38,000 people gather on open ground in downtown Tokyo. It's an ill-fated decision. The intense heat of the fires produces a devastating 300-foot-tall fire tornado, known to the locals as a dragon whirlwind. It's difficult to imagine the abject terror these people felt when faced by this deadly, swirling vortex of flames. Only 300 survive. More than 37,000 burn to death where they stand. As the fires burn uncontrollably, some Japanese, devastated by the sight of their cities in ruins, look for someone to blame. Rumors spread that Koreans, the subjects of Japanese rule for nearly 20 years, had started many of these fires, poisoned water supplies, and were looting and pillaging. That none of this was true didn't matter. Gangs roamed the streets, beating to death anyone they suspected was Korean. Some estimates put the number of innocent victims of this vigilante slaughter at 10,000. The worst of nature was exposing the worst of mankind. The death toll from the 1923 earthquake was reported to be 140,000. The city of Yokohama was almost 90% razed, as was 60% of Tokyo. In total, 600,000 houses were destroyed, and 1.9 million people were left homeless. Later, the two cities will be rebuilt, but the impact of the earthquake will be considerable and has given historians something to chew on. In the early 1920s, Yokohama was open to the rest of the world. It was considered a bridge between Japanese and Western civilizations, but many Japanese interpreted the disaster as divine punishment for submitting to decadence. According to some historians, Japan then closed its society out of superstition to avoid being struck by a new tragedy. The disaster rekindled the nationalist flame and a return to traditional values, an ideology which would have played a crucial role when Japan entered World War II in 1941. That's how the devastating earthquake of 1923 may have changed the history of the 20th century. At last, at number 1, here's an earthquake that destroyed a city and a political movement and helped birth an economic superpower. It's China's Great Tangshan earthquake of 1976. In July 1976, Chairman Mao, the leader of China, falls seriously ill. He is the symbol of the so-called Cultural Revolution, which aims to renounce economic, intellectual, and scientific advances and to promote proletarian ideology. 1 year earlier, Chinese scientists had successfully predicted 3 earthquakes, saving thousands of lives. As part of the Cultural Revolution, those scientists were removed from office. It would be a terrible decision. Within the country, Mao's movement has thrown China into chaos. All elements considered non-compliant are eliminated. But on July 28, 1976, an unforeseeable event will change the course of history. At 3:42 a.m., violent tremors hit the mining town of Tangshan. The earth shakes and rumbles. It's an earthquake of incredible violence, magnitude 7.8. Almost the entire city was built on very loose soil, and the foundations of most of the city's buildings were not deeply anchored in rock. Under the effect of seismic waves, the ground instantly liquefies. Tangshan is shattered. The next morning reveals a landscape of desolation. Hundreds of thousands of residents are trapped under the rubble. It took only 16 seconds to destroy an entire city. The survivors begin digging to rescue members of their families, friends, and neighbors. But fate has more in store. A second earthquake, with a magnitude of 7.1, hits the city in the afternoon. 2 violent earthquakes in the space of a single day. A real nightmare. The heroic inhabitants managed to free 80% of the people trapped under the rubble. But while hundreds of thousands of injured people are still trapped by debris, little help is forthcoming. The Gang of Four, the name given to the 4 officials who run the country alongside Mao, refuse the humanitarian aid offered by other countries. They are completely uninterested in the heroism of the people of Tangshan and their fight for their own survival. They demonstrate a contempt that the Chinese people will never forgive or forget. The toll of the 1976 earthquake is still the subject of debate. The official figure of 242,679 dead makes this earthquake by far the deadliest of the 20th century. But according to some experts, the number of victims could actually be double or even triple and could be closer to 700,000. Shortly after the disaster, Chairman Mao died. Members of the Gang of Four were imprisoned for treason against the Chinese people. The Cultural Revolution was consigned to the dustbin of history. Universities reopened, science and technology were embraced once again, economic growth was prioritized, and China went on to become the strongest economy in the world. The city of Tangshan has been rebuilt and now thrives. Its population exceeds 3 million people. Given the timing of events, many experts believe that the earthquake that struck Tangshan in 1976 played a role in the downfall of the Cultural Revolution and those close to Mao. If this hypothesis is true, then the political impact of this natural disaster is unparalleled in history. When you combine all that with the extent of the damage caused and the number of victims, it's easy to make a case that the Great Tangshan earthquake of 1976 takes first place in the ranking of the 10 top earthquakes that have left their marks. Nothing can prepare you when the Earth starts literally moving underneath you. And the reality is, when these quakes are at their strongest, there is nothing we can do to keep ourselves safe. The violent power of these events is so extreme that nothing man-made can survive them. Billions of people around the world live around dangerous fault lines, and as we've seen, they're living on a trapdoor to hell on Earth that can spring open at any moment. We can only hope that seismologists and geologists can perfect their prediction methods, because right now, when it comes to the big ones that will inevitably strike, we're relying on just one thing to escape unscathed: pure random chance. Goodbye, and good luck out there.